The coffee mug shattered against the wall 2 inches from my head, ceramic shards raining onto the linoleum like confetti at a funeral. My father stood in the doorway of his corner office, red-faced, his silk tie askew, and for the first time in my 26 years, I saw something beyond contempt in his eyes. I saw fear. "You can't do this," he hissed, but the tremor in his voice told me he already knew the truth. The building deed sat heavy in my briefcase, still warm from the lawyer's office, and as I watched him realize what I'd become, I thought back to the morning he called me the lowest of the low, and wondered if he remembered spitting on my janitor's uniform. The rejection email arrived on a Tuesday morning in March, and I read it 3 times before the words stopped blurring. "We regret to inform you that the position of junior account executive has been filled by a more suitable candidate." My coffee had gone cold in the ceramic mug my girlfriend, ex-girlfriend now, had bought me for Christmas, the one with "Future Executive" printed in bold letters that suddenly felt like a cruel joke. I sat in the cramped studio apartment I could barely afford, walls closing in with every shallow breath, and pulled up my bank account. $247. Rent was due in 5 days, and the number glowed on my phone screen like a countdown timer to homelessness. My father's words echoed in my skull, the ones he'd delivered over overpriced steak 3 months earlier when I'd told him I was pursuing corporate work instead of joining his commercial real estate firm. "You'll be nothing without the family name," he'd said, cutting his ribeye with surgical precision. "You think you're better than what I built? You'll come crawling back." I'd walked out of that restaurant with my pride intact and my future uncertain, but I'd believed in myself. The world had other plans. By Thursday, I'd applied to 63 positions and received 2 automated responses. Friday brought a flood of overdue notices: electric, internet, car insurance, each one another nail in the coffin of my independence. My phone buzzed with a text from Mom. "Your father wants to know if you've reconsidered. The offer still stands." I deleted it without responding. That's when I saw the ad on Craigslist, posted by Meridian Properties Management, the company that owned half the commercial buildings downtown, including the Blackstone Tower where my father's firm occupied the top 3 floors. Janitor needed, immediate hire, night shift, $15 an hour. My finger hovered over the listing for a full minute before I clicked. The interview happened in a basement office that smelled of industrial cleaner and defeat. The hiring manager, a tired woman named Paula with reading glasses on a beaded chain, barely looked at my resume. "You got a strong back?" she asked. I nodded. "You mind working when everyone else is asleep?" I shook my head. "You start Monday. Uniforms provided. Don't be late." She handed me a packet of tax forms and a key card with my employee number scratched on masking tape. I wore the navy blue jumpsuit for the first time on a Sunday night, standing in my bathroom mirror, and barely recognized myself. The fabric was stiff and smelled like plastic packaging, and my name, Marcus, was stitched over my heart in blocky red letters. I thought about my college degree gathering dust in a drawer, about the promises I'd made to myself at graduation, and then I thought about the eviction notice taped to my door and put on my steel-toed boots. Blackstone Tower stood 23 stories tall in the financial district, all glass and chrome, a monument to ambition. I entered through the service entrance at 10 p.m., my key card beeping me through reinforced doors, and met my supervisor, a grizzled man named Frank who'd been cleaning these halls for 17 years. "Simple work," he said, showing me the supply closet on each floor. "Empty trash, vacuum, wipe down surfaces, bathrooms last. Start at the top, work down. You'll be on floors 18 through 23. My father's firm occupied floors 21 through 23. The first 3 nights passed without incident. I moved through empty offices like a ghost, earbuds in, pushing my cart of supplies past glass walls displaying framed deals and awards. I learned the building's rhythm, the hum of the HVAC system at midnight, the way fluorescent lights flickered in Conference Room C, the smell of expensive cologne that lingered in executive bathrooms hours after everyone had gone home. On Thursday night, I was emptying a trash bin on the 22nd floor when I heard voices. Two men in shirt sleeves emerged from the elevator, laughing about something, and I instinctively turned my face away, ducking behind my cart. They passed without noticing me, and I realized with a sharp twist in my gut that I'd been hiding from people who used to be my peers. The encounter I'd been dreading came the following Tuesday. I was cleaning the executive floor at 11 p.m., buffing the marble tile outside the corner offices when the elevator dinged. My father stepped out in his charcoal suit, phone pressed to his ear, still working at an hour when most of the city slept. He moved past me without a glance, then stopped mid-stride and turned back. Recognition dawned slowly, like sunrise through storm clouds, and his expression shifted from confusion to disgust. Marcus? His voice dripped with such venom that the name sounded like a curse. What the hell are you doing here? I straightened, meeting his eyes for the first time in months. Working? Working? He barked a laugh that echoed off the glass walls. This is working? This? He gestured at my uniform, my cart, the mop in my hands. I always knew you'd fail, but this? This is pathetic even for you. It's honest work. Honest work. He stepped closer, and I could smell the scotch on his breath. You're a janitor, Marcus. A janitor. You clean up other people's trash. You're the lowest of the low, and you did this to yourself. His face twisted with something beyond anger. It was satisfaction, the vindication of a prophecy self-fulfilled. You could have had everything. Instead, you're this. He pulled a wad of bills from his pocket, peeled off a 20, and dropped it on my supply cart, like tossing coins to a beggar. Then he turned on his heel and disappeared into his office, slamming the door hard enough to rattle the frosted glass nameplate. Charles Rivera, President and CEO, Rivera Commercial Real Estate. I stood there for 5 full minutes, staring at that $20 bill, before I picked it up and put it in my pocket. What my father didn't know, what no one knew, was that I'd been saving every penny from this job and living on rice and canned soup for weeks. What he didn't know was that I'd been watching, learning, listening to conversations that happened in conference rooms late at night when executives thought no one was around. What he didn't know was 3 days earlier, I'd overheard something that would change everything. But that night, all I knew was rage and humiliation, and I finished my shift with my jaw clenched so tight my teeth ached.
Frank found me in the service elevator at 2 a.m., sitting on an overturned bucket with my head in my hands. "Rough night?" he asked, his gravelly voice surprisingly gentle. I told him about my father, about the $20 bill still burning in my pocket, and he listened without interrupting. When I finished, he sat down on his own bucket across from me. "You know what I learned in 17 years?" Frank said, pulling out a thermos of coffee and pouring me a cup in the lid. "Buildings tell you everything if you pay attention. I've seen empires rise and fall in these offices. I've cleaned up after celebrations and bankruptcies, affairs and firings. The people in the fancy suits, they think we're invisible, but we see things they'll never understand." "Like what?" I asked, sipping the bitter coffee. "Like the fact that your father's company is bleeding money." Frank's eyes held mine, sharp despite the late hour. I've been cleaning these floors long enough to read the signs. More late-night meetings, more shouting. Last month, 3 junior associates got let go on the same day, and last week, I found a stack of rejected loan applications in the recycling. He leaned forward. "The commercial real estate market's shifting, Marcus. Half the building's sitting empty because everyone's going remote. The owner, old man Blackstone, he's trying to sell before the whole thing goes under." My pulse quickened. "How do you know all this?" "Because I empty the trash bins where people throw their secrets." Frank smiled, but it didn't reach his eyes. "And because I listen when executives think the janitor's too stupid to understand their conversations." Over the following weeks, I started paying attention in ways I never had before. I learned that Frank was right. The building was hemorrhaging tenants, and Thomas Blackstone, the 78-year-old owner, was desperate to offload the property before market conditions worsened. I learned that my father's firm was behind on rent by 2 months, leveraged to the hilt on bad investments, and holding on by the thinnest of threads. I learned this because I cleaned their offices and read the documents they left scattered on desks, assuming the help couldn't comprehend spreadsheets. During my lunch breaks, I started researching. I sat in the building's empty cafeteria with my laptop, studying commercial real estate law, property valuation, financing structures. I called my former college roommate, Derek, who worked in private equity, and asked hypothetical questions about distressed asset acquisitions. Why the sudden interest, he asked. Just curious, I lied. The numbers started taking shape in my mind like a puzzle assembling itself. Blackstone Tower was valued at $12 million in its current state, but with half the office space vacant and major renovations needed, it would sell for significantly less. My father's company owed the building nearly $200,000 in back rent, which would complicate any sale. And Thomas Blackstone's son, according to an article I found in the business section, lived in Portugal and had no interest in property management. It was a perfect storm of opportunity, if only I had the resources to exploit it. I thought about that $20 bill, now tucked in my wallet behind my driver's license, and an idea began to form. It was audacious, probably impossible, but it lodged itself in my brain like a splinter, growing more insistent with each passing night. The turning point came on Wednesday, in May, 3 months since my janitorial career. I was cleaning the 23rd floor conference room at midnight when voices echoed down the hallway, my father and Thomas Blackstone himself walking toward me. I quickly pushed my cart into the supply closet and left the door cracked just enough to hear them settle into the leather chairs at the long mahogany table. "I can get to the money, Thomas." My father's voice carried the forced confidence of a desperate man. "Just give me 60 more days, and we'll clear the arrears plus 3 months forward." "Charles, you've been saying that for half a year." Blackstone's voice was tired, defeated. "I'm 78 years old. My son wants me to retire. I need to sell this building, and I need a clean slate to do it. That means tenants who pay their rent or empty offices I can show to buyers. If you evict me, you'll have 3 empty floors in an already vacant building. That'll crater your sale price." "Maybe so, but at least I won't be hemorrhaging cash monthly." Blackstone sighed deeply, the sound of a man who'd run out of options. "I've got an interested buyer willing to take the property as is for $8 million. It's a lowball, but I'm out of time. The deal closes in 90 days unless something changes." $8 million. The number hung in the air like smoke. "Who's the buyer?" my father asked, and I could hear the edge in his voice. "Some investment group out of Chicago. They're going to gut the interior and convert it to mixed use. Your firm won't fit their plans, Charles. I'm sorry, but it's over." Their conversation continued for another 20 minutes, but I'd heard enough. I waited until they left, then emerged from the closet on shaking legs and pulled out my phone. I opened my banking app, stared at my balance, $4,218 after 3 months of brutal saving, and started making calculations that would have seemed insane to anyone watching. The next morning, I called Derek. "Remember those hypothetical questions about distressed assets?" I said. "They weren't hypothetical. I need to know how someone with limited capital could acquire an $8 million property." Derek was silent for a long moment. "Marcus, what are you planning?" "Something either brilliant or suicidal, probably both." He talked me through the fundamentals of creative financing, seller financing, partnerships, leveraged buyouts, hard money loans. He said you'd need to convince the seller to carry a note, which means putting down maybe 10 to 20% and paying them the balance over time with interest. But you'd also need to show you can cover operating costs and fill the building. And you'd need partners with capital, which means giving up equity. What if I could find a partner who'd provide the down payment and first year's operating capital in exchange for, say, 40% equity? Then you'd own the majority stake in an $8 million property for basically no money down, assuming you can execute. Derek's voice carried a mixture of admiration and concern. "But Marcus, that's not just audacious, that's playing in a league way above your experience level. One mistake and you'd be buried in debt and lawsuits." "I know," I said, staring at the Blackstone Tower through my apartment window, its glass facade catching the morning sun. "I know this building inside and out. I know every crack in the facade, every tenant complaint, every structural issue. I've spent 3 months learning its secrets, and I know exactly how much my father's firm is worth to the right buyer." "Your father?" Derek's tone shifted. "This is about him?" "This is about justice," I corrected, "and opportunity. They just happen to intersect." Over the following month, I worked with an intensity that bordered on obsession. By day, I slept 4 hours and spent the rest researching, modeling financial scenarios, cold calling potential investors. By night, I cleaned the building and gathered more intelligence. I befriended the building engineer, a man named Ray, who showed me maintenance records revealing deferred repairs that explained the low sale price. I cultivated a relationship with the property manager, an exhausted woman named Susan, who complained freely about Blackstone's declining health and absentee son. I found my partner through a former professor, a woman named Jennifer Chen, who ran a small real estate investment fund focused on urban revitalization. When I pitched her on the Blackstone Tower deal, complete with financial models, tenant analysis, and renovation plans, she sat across from me in a coffee shop looking alternately impressed and skeptical. "You're a janitor," she said finally, not unkindly. "I'm a janitor who understands this building better than anyone alive, and I'm a motivated seller's dream, someone local, invested in the community, and with a vision for the property's future. Blackstone doesn't want a Chicago investment group gutting the interior. He wants someone who will preserve it." Jennifer studied me for a long moment, then smiled. "You know what? I believe you. Let's structure a deal." The terms we hammered out over the following weeks were unconventional but workable. Jennifer's fund would provide the $800,000 down payment and first year's operating costs in exchange for 35% equity. I would own 51%, controlling interest, and the remaining 14% would go to a third partner, Derek, who agreed to join as CFO in exchange for equity and a modest salary. Now, all I had to do was convince a 78-year-old man to bet his legacy on a 26-year-old janitor.
Thomas Blackstone's estate sat in the hills overlooking the city, a mid-century modern masterpiece with walls of glass that framed the skyline like a postcard. I stood at the front door on a Saturday morning in June, wearing the only suit I owned, purchased years ago for job interviews that now felt like relics from another life, and clutched my leather portfolio with sweating palms. Susan, the property manager, had given me his home address after I'd spent 2 weeks convincing her I wasn't a stalker. "He's a good man," she'd said. "He deserves to know what you're planning, even if it's crazy. But Marcus, if you're wasting his time, I'll make sure you never work in this city again." Blackstone himself answered the door, wearing khakis and a linen shirt. His white hair combed back from a lined face that held the weariness of a man watching his life's work crumble. "Mr. Blackstone," I said, extending my hand, "my name is Marcus Rivera. I clean your building at night, and I'd like to buy it from you." He stared at me for 3 full seconds, then laughed. Not cruel, just genuinely surprised. "Well, that's certainly a new approach." He stepped aside. "Come in, this I have to hear." His living room overlooked the city through floor-to-ceiling windows, and I could see Blackstone Tower in the distance, a vertical shard of glass among dozens of its siblings. I sat on a leather sofa that probably cost more than my car, and opened my portfolio to the 20-page proposal I'd spent 6 weeks preparing. "I know this sounds insane," I began. "I'm 26 years old, I've been cleaning your building for 3 months, and my bank account has $4,000 in it. But I also know your property better than anyone because I've spent 90 nights studying every floor, every system, every problem." I slid him the executive summary. "I know you're selling to a Chicago investment group for $8 million, and I know why. Because your son wants you to retire, you're tired of the headache, and you need to close quickly. But I also know that deal will gut everything you built." Blackstone picked up the summary, his reading glasses materializing from his shirt pocket. "And you have a better offer?" "I have a different offer," I said. "Same price, $8 million, but structured as seller financing over 12 years at 6% interest. My partners and I will put down 10%, $800,000, immediately. You'll get steady monthly payments for the next decade, which will likely exceed what you'd earn investing the full sale price in treasury bonds given current rates. And more importantly, you'll know the building stays local, stays relevant, and stays standing." "Who are these partners?" He was reading now, actually reading, his eyes moving down the page with the focus of a man who'd built a career on numbers. "Jennifer Chen of Chen Capital, a local investment fund focused on urban revitalization. She's providing the down payment and first-year operating capital. Derek Shaw, CPA, former Goldman analyst, he'll serve as CFO. And me. I met his eyes. I'll serve as managing partner and building operator. A janitor as managing partner? Blackstone looked up, but there was curiosity in his gaze now, not dismissal. A janitor who spent 3 months learning this building's secrets, I said. And then I told him things that made his eyebrows rise. The leaking roof membrane on the northeast corner that Ray had been patch fixing for 2 years. The HVAC system on floors 12 through 14 that was operating at 60% efficiency. The water damage in the basement parking garage that no one had addressed because the engineer was stretched too thin. I told him about tenant complaints that never reached his desk, about the outdated elevator control system, about the common area redesign that would cost $30,000 but increased tenant retention by creating collaborative spaces. I told him things only someone who'd spent 100 nights in that building could possibly know. "You've done your homework," Blackstone said softly, setting down the proposal. "But Marcus, running a commercial property isn't about knowledge, it's about relationships, reputation, capital reserves, crisis management. What happens when the boiler fails at 2 a.m. in January and you need $100,000 in emergency repairs?" "Then I'll call you," I said, and he blinked. "Because part of my offer includes a consulting arrangement. You stay on for 3 years as senior advisor at $50,000 annually. You guide me through the mistakes I'm going to make, you lend credibility to the new ownership, and you get to ensure your legacy doesn't become a cautionary tale." Blackstone sat back in his chair, fingers steepled, and for a long moment said nothing. Outside the windows, the city sprawled beneath a June sky. And somewhere in that landscape of glass and steel was the building he'd erected 40 years ago, when he was younger than I was now. "Why are you really doing this?" he asked finally. "And don't give me the speech about opportunity and passion. There's something personal here. I can feel it." So I told him about my father. I told him about the rejection, the humiliation, the $20 bill, and the contempt that came with it. I told him about cleaning offices at night while executives mocked the help, about learning that I was invisible to people I'd once hoped to join. "My father's firm is hemorrhaging money," I said. "They're 2 months behind on rent and drowning in bad investments. When you sell to Chicago, they'll get evicted and he'll lose everything." "Revenge," Blackstone said quietly. "Justice," I corrected. "And maybe a lesson. He taught me I was nothing without the family name. I'm going to teach him that names don't build empires. Work does. Vision does. The willingness to be underestimated and still show up." Blackstone stood, walked to the windows, and stared out at his city for what felt like hours. When he turned back, his eyes were wet. "My father was a construction worker," he said. "Immigrant from Poland, worked his hands to the bone, died at 53 from a heart attack on a job site. When I told him I wanted to be a developer, he laughed and said I'd never be more than a laborer. But he was wrong, and I spent 40 years proving it." He smiled, sad and distant. "I see him in you, Marcus, that hunger, that need to prove the world wrong." "So is that a yes?" "That's a meeting with my lawyer on Monday," Blackstone said, extending his hand. "You bring your partners, I'll bring my son on video call from Lisbon, and we'll see if this crazy idea can become a reality. But Marcus, if you're doing this just to hurt your father, you'll fail. Buildings don't care about grudges. They care about vision and execution. Make sure you're chasing something, not just running from something." I nodded, not trusting my voice, and left his estate with my heart pounding so hard I thought it might crack my ribs.
The following Monday, in a lawyer's office downtown, we structured the deal. Jennifer Chen's fund wired the down payment, contracts were signed with Thomas Blackstone's shaking hand, and Derek set up the operating accounts. By Wednesday afternoon, I owned 51% of an $8 million property, and Thomas Blackstone owned a promissory note that would pay him for the next 12 years. Thursday morning, I woke up as a landlord. Friday afternoon, I sent a certified letter to Rivera Commercial Real Estate informing them of the ownership change and requesting a meeting to discuss the past due rent. Saturday, I received a phone call from my father's attorney. And Monday, I walked into Blackstone Tower through the front entrance for the first time, wearing my suit instead of my jumpsuit, and took the elevator to the 23rd floor. My father was waiting in his office, standing behind his desk like a general preparing for siege. His assistant, a nervous woman named Patricia, who'd always been kind to me during my cleaning shifts, hovered near the door, unsure whether to stay or flee. "You can go, Patricia," I said gently. She fled. My father and I stared at each other across the expanse of his mahogany desk, and I saw him truly for the first time in years, not as the titan of my childhood or the villain of my recent nightmares, but as a middle-aged man in an expensive suit who'd built his identity on a foundation that was crumbling beneath him. "You bought the building?" he said, and it wasn't a question. "I bought the building," I confirmed. "With what money?" "With creativity, partnership, and 3 months of learning what you were too proud to see." I sat down uninvited in the guest chair. "You owe this building $187,000 in back rent, plus late fees. That's due in 30 days, or you're in breach of your lease." "You're not serious?" "I'm completely serious." I pulled out a folder and slid it across the desk. "Here are your options. Option 1, you pay what you owe and we renegotiate your lease at market rates. Option 2, you vacate the premises within 60 days per the lease default clause. Option 3, we work out a payment plan that includes restructuring your firm's finances, which I've taken the liberty of reviewing. I tapped the spreadsheet in the folder, and which suggests you're about 3 bad months away from bankruptcy." My father's face went through several shades of red before settling on a pale, dangerous calm. "You think you can come in here and threaten me? You're a child playing dress-up, Marcus. You have no idea how to run a building, how to manage tenants, how to navigate the legal complexities." "I have Thomas Blackstone on retainer as senior advisor," I interrupted. "I have Jennifer Chen of Chen Capital as a partner with 20 years of property management experience. I have Derek Shaw as CFO, who used to analyze distressed assets for Goldman Sachs. And I have 3 months of watching you fail to see the people around you, which taught me more about leadership than you ever could." I stood, straightening my tie, and allowed myself a moment to savor what came next. "But here's what I really have, Dad. I have the memory of you spitting insults at me in your hallway, calling me the lowest of the low, throwing money at me like I was a beggar. And now I have the power to decide whether you keep your legacy or lose it." I moved toward the door, then stopped. "You have until the end of business Friday to decide which option you're choosing. My assistant will send you the paperwork." "Marcus," his voice cracked, and I'd never heard that sound from him before. But I was already gone, stepping into the elevator with my head high, descending from the 23rd floor to the lobby where Frank was starting his evening shift. "How'd it go?" he asked, seeing the look on my face. "It went," I said, and the smile that crossed my face felt like sunrise.
My father chose option 3, but not before exhausting every other possibility first. His attorneys sent threatening letters about improper notice and lease violations, all of which Derek calmly rebutted with documentation showing we'd followed every legal requirement to the letter. His business partners called offering alternate payment structures that would have amounted to pennies on the dollar. His colleagues in the commercial real estate community attempted to apply pressure through Thomas Blackstone, who listened politely, then told them his decision was final. 3 weeks after my initial meeting, my father finally requested a sit-down to discuss the payment plan. I scheduled it for a Thursday afternoon in the building's main conference room, neutral territory, not his office, and brought Derek and Jennifer as backup. My father arrived alone, which spoke volumes about how isolated he'd become. The man who sat across from me looked 10 years older than the one who'd thrown a coffee mug at my head 6 months earlier. His suit was still expensive, but showed wrinkles he'd once never have tolerated. His hair, usually perfect, was graying at the temples and slightly unkempt. His eyes carried the hollow exhaustion of someone who'd stopped sleeping. "You're enjoying this," he said without preamble. "I'm not," I replied honestly. "I'm surviving it. There's a difference." Jennifer laid out the terms we'd prepared. Rivera Commercial Real Estate would pay $15,000 monthly for 12 months to clear the arrears, plus current rent, which would be renegotiated to market rate, actually lower than surrounding buildings, to account for his firm's financial situation. In exchange, my father would agree to comprehensive financial oversight, including quarterly reviews and expenditure approval for anything over $10,000. "You want me to put me on an allowance?" my father said flatly. "We want to keep you in business," Derek corrected. "Your current burn rate suggests insolvency within 6 months. This plan extends your runway and gives you time to restructure." My father looked at me, really looked at me, and I saw something I'd never witnessed before: vulnerability. "When did you become so ruthless?" "When I learned that kindness gets you spit on," I said. "You taught me that." The room fell silent, except for the hum of the air conditioning. My father's hands, resting on the conference table, trembled slightly. "I was proud of you once," he said quietly. "When you graduated college, when you chose to make your own path, I was proud, and it terrified me because I knew you'd eventually see that I was just a man who got lucky in a bull market and rode it until the music stopped. This isn't about you being proud." "Let me finish." His voice carried an urgency I'd never heard. "I pushed you away because I didn't want you to see me fail. And when you succeeded without me, when you got into corporate track programs and made connections I could never give you, I resented you for having opportunities I never had. So when you stumbled, when the market shifted and the jobs dried up, I felt vindicated. I felt like you'd finally understand that the world is cruel and arbitrary, and no amount of talent saves you from circumstance." He rubbed his face with both hands, suddenly looking ancient. "But then you became a janitor, and instead of breaking, you learned. You watched. You planned. You did exactly what I should have done 30 years ago when the market started shifting. You adapted. And I called you the lowest of the low because I couldn't stand that you were becoming everything I'd failed to be." The confession hung in the air like smoke from a fire that had finally burned itself out. Jennifer and Derek exchanged glances, giving us space in the silence. "Why are you telling me this?" I asked. "Because you won," my father said simply. "You have the building, the power, the future. You can evict me tomorrow and you'd be justified. But Marcus, if there's any part of you that remembers who I was before the bitterness, if there's any part that remembers fishing trips when you were 8, or teaching you to ride a bike, or sitting with you in the hospital when you broke your arm, I'm asking you to show me the mercy I never showed you." I thought about that $20 bill, still in my wallet, still carrying the weight of humiliation. I thought about cleaning his office while he worked late, invisible to him, but seeing everything. I thought about Thomas Blackstone's warning: "If you're doing this just to hurt your father, you'll fail." "I'll agree to the payment plan," I said finally, and my father's shoulders sagged with relief. "But there are conditions beyond the financial terms." "Anything." "You attend family counseling with me, once a week for 6 months with a therapist of my choosing." My voice was steady, but my heart hammered against my ribs. "Because I'm not interested in revenge anymore. I'm interested in understanding how we got here and making sure we don't pass this poison to another generation." My father's eyes widened, then welled with tears he didn't bother to hide. "You're planning a family?" "Someday, maybe," I said. "And when that day comes, I want them to know their grandfather as someone who learned from his mistakes, not someone who died bitter and alone in a corner office." The contract was signed that afternoon, terms agreed upon, and for the first time in 6 months, my father and I shook hands, not as landlord and tenant, but as two men attempting to bridge a chasm that had taken decades to form. The real work, I learned quickly, was far less dramatic than confrontations with my father. Managing a commercial property was a daily grind of maintenance requests, tenant complaints, financial projections, and endless small decisions that accumulate into the difference between success and failure. I promoted Frank, the head of building operations, giving him a 20% raise and an assistant. I hired Ray, the building engineer, full-time with benefits. I brought Susan into the ownership team as property manager with a small equity stake, making her invested in our collective success. Together, we began transforming Blackstone Tower from a deteriorating relic into a modern workplace.
Jennifer's fund provided capital for renovations, updated common areas with collaboration spaces, improved HVAC efficiency, modernized elevators, rooftop terrace converted to tenant amenity space. Derek restructured our finances to maximize cash flow while building reserves for emergencies. Within 3 months, we'd signed 2 new tenants to fill vacant floors. Within 6 months, building occupancy hit 78%, up from 52% under the previous ownership. The monthly income exceeded our projections, and the property's value stabilized, then began climbing. My father's firm survived, shrunken but stable, and he kept his word about counseling. Thursday evenings at 6 p.m., we sat in a therapist's office in an old brownstone downtown and unpacked 30 years of resentment, expectations, and missed connections. The conversations were brutal and necessary, like setting a broken bone that had healed wrong. "You were never the lowest of the low," he said during one session, 6 months into our work together. "I said that because I felt like the lowest of the low and couldn't admit it. I projected my failure onto you because it was easier than accepting responsibility." "I know," I said, and I did. The anger that had fueled my initial actions had mellowed into something more complex. Not forgiveness exactly, but understanding. But hearing you say it matters. The relationship we built was different from the one we'd lost, more honest and less comfortable, but it was real. We would never have the easy affection I saw in other fathers and sons, but we had something perhaps more valuable, the acknowledgement that we were both flawed people trying to be better. Thomas Blackstone became more than an advisor. He became a mentor. He walked me through crisis management when pipes burst during a January cold snap, taught me negotiation tactics when a major tenant threatens a leave, shared stories about building relationships in a business built on trust and reputation. "You're doing well," he told me during one of our monthly dinners at his estate. "Better than I did at my age, if I'm honest. You have something I had to learn the hard way: empathy. You see the people around you." "I learned to see them. I was invisible," I said. "The best lessons usually cost us something," he replied, pouring expensive scotch into crystal glasses. "You paid yours in humiliation. It's a steep price, but it bought you wisdom most people never acquire." By the building's 1-year anniversary under new ownership, Blackstone Tower was profitable, well-maintained, and 91% occupied. Jennifer's fund had seen returns exceeding their projections. Derek had built out systems that ran smoothly that I could actually take weekends off. Frank had trained a team of maintenance workers who took pride in their work because they were respected and compensated fairly. And I had transformed from the lowest of the low into someone who understood that hierarchy was an illusion, maintained by people too afraid to look at the foundations beneath them.
The moment I'd been unconsciously building toward arrived on a Tuesday morning in spring, almost exactly 1 year after I'd bought the building. I was in my office, a modest space on the ground floor, purposely chosen to stay connected to operations, when Patricia, my father's assistant, called. "Marcus, you should come up to 23, she said, her voice tight with something I couldn't identify. "Your father wants to see you." I found him in his office with 3 boxes stacked on his desk, personal items wrapped in newspaper, the awards he'd collected over 30 years, framed photos of projects, the expensive pen set from his first major deal. He looked smaller somehow, diminished by the empty walls where accolades had once hung like armor. "I'm leaving," he said without preamble. "The firm is downsizing, consolidating. We're taking a quarter of the space, subleasing the rest, and I'm stepping back from day-to-day operations." He gestured at the boxes. "Retirement, I suppose, or semi-retirement. I haven't figured out the terminology yet." "Are you okay?" I asked, because despite everything, he was still my father, and concern was muscle memory. "I'm broke in ways that have nothing to do with money," he said with a sad smile. "But I'm working on it. The therapy helps. So does humility, which turns out to be an acquired taste." He picked up a framed photo from his desk, the 2 of us at my high school graduation, his arm around my shoulders, both smiling for a camera. "I found this in a drawer yesterday. I'd forgotten what we looked like when we still liked each other." I took the frame from him, studying 2 people who felt like strangers. "We were performing even then," I said. You were the proud father, I was the dutiful son. Neither of us was being honest. No, he agreed. But maybe that's where we start, with honesty. He extended his hand formally, like we were strangers meeting for the first time. Charles Rivera, failed real estate executive, mediocre father, decent golfer on Tuesdays, trying to figure out who I am when I'm not defined by what I own. I shook his hand, matching his grip. Marcus Rivera, recovering janitor, accidental landlord, your son, trying to build something that lasts without inheriting your mistakes. You'll make your own mistakes, he said. Different ones, hopefully better ones, but you'll make them because that's what builders do. We mess up, learn, and try again. He released my hand. I'm proud of you. I should have said that sooner, said it more. I'm proud of the man you've become, especially the parts that are nothing like me. The words landed softly, without the weight I'd expected, and I realized I didn't need them anymore. The validation I'd been chasing, first through success, then through revenge, had been replaced by something more durable, self-knowledge. Thank you, I said simply. That means something. He picked up the first box, and I grabbed another, and together we carried his professional life to the elevator. In the lobby, his car was waiting, and we loaded everything into the trunk in silence. When the last box was stowed, he turned to me. The building looks good, he said, gesturing at the renovated lobby with its new furniture and living wall. You've done more in a year than Blackstone did in the last 5. It feels alive again. It's a team effort, I said. Frank, Susan, Ray, Derek, Jennifer, they make it work. No, my father corrected gently. You make it work. They help, but you're the foundation. Never forget that. He opened his car door, then paused. I heard you're mentoring some business students from the university, teaching a seminar on commercial real estate and second chances. Who told you that? Patricia, she's very proud of you. Tells everyone who'll listen. He smiled. She said you tell them the story about being a janitor and learning more from emptying trash than from any MBA course. Is that true? It's true, I said. The best education I got was being invisible and watching how people treat those they think don't matter. Good, my father said. Teach them that. Teach them that power without empathy is just cruelty in an expensive suit. He climbed into his car, started the engine, then rolled down the window. I'll see you Thursday, 6 p.m. Therapy. Wouldn't miss it, I said, and I meant it. I watched him drive away, taking with him the last remnants of the man he'd been, making space for whoever he was becoming. Then I turned and walked back into Blackstone Tower, through the lobby where I'd once pushed a janitor's cart, past the security desk where guards now greeted me by name, and took the elevator to the ground floor office where real work awaited. Frank was waiting, with a crisis. The HVAC on 14 was acting up again. And Susan had questions about a new tenant's build-out specs, and Derek needed signatures on loan documents. The day unfolded in a rhythm I'd love to love, the daily grind of problems and solutions that added up to something larger than any single moment. During my lunch break, I pulled out my wallet and found the $20 bill, now worn soft from a year of traveling with me. I'd kept it as a reminder, a talisman of transformation, but I realized I didn't need it anymore. The validation I'd been chasing, first through success, then through revenge, had been replaced by something more durable, self-knowledge. Thank you, I said simply. That means something. He picked up the first box, and I grabbed another, and together we carried his professional life to the elevator. In the lobby, his car was waiting, and we loaded everything into the trunk in silence. When the last box was stowed, he turned to me. The building looks good, he said, gesturing at the renovated lobby with its new furniture and living wall. You've done more in a year than Blackstone did in the last 5. It feels alive again. It's a team effort, I said. Frank, Susan, Ray, Derek, Jennifer, they make it work. No, my father corrected gently. You make it work. They help, but you're the foundation. Never forget that. He opened his car door, then paused. I heard you're mentoring some business students from the university, teaching a seminar on commercial real estate and second chances? Who told you that? Patricia, she's very proud of you. Tells everyone who'll listen. He smiled. She said you tell them the story about being a janitor and learning more from emptying trash than from any MBA course. Is that true? It's true, I said. The best education I got was being invisible and watching how people treat those they think don't matter. Good, my father said. Teach them that. Teach them that power without empathy is just cruelty in an expensive suit. He climbed into his car, started the engine, then rolled down the window. I'll see you Thursday, 6 p.m. Therapy. Wouldn't miss it, I said, and I meant it. I watched him drive away, taking with him the last remnants of the man he'd been, making space for whoever he was becoming. Then I turned and walked back into Blackstone Tower, through the lobby where I'd once pushed a janitor's cart, past the security desk where guards now greeted me by name, and took the elevator to the ground floor office where real work awaited. Frank was waiting, with a crisis. The HVAC on 14 was acting up again. And Susan had questions about a new tenant's build-out specs, and Derek needed signatures on loan documents. I sat back, considering the weight of what she was offering. Another building meant more responsibility, more risk, more people depending on decisions I'd make. It meant moving from accidental landlord to intentional entrepreneur. It meant accepting that the transformation that started in humiliation had become a calling. Tell them I'm interested, I said, but schedule the meeting for next week. I want Thomas to weigh in, and I want to make sure we're overextending. Jennifer grinned. Cautious and ambitious. That's the combination that builds empires. I don't want an empire, I corrected. I want something sustainable, something that treats people well and lasts beyond me. Even better, she said, and left me to my writing. The first chapter began, I was 26 years old when my father spat contempt at me up hallway, calling me the lowest of the low for wearing a janitor's uniform. 6 months later, I handed him an eviction notice as the new owner of the building where he worked. But this isn't a story about revenge. It's a story about vision, humility, and the radical act of seeing clearly when the world tells you to look away. 3 hours later, Jennifer knocked on my door. The investors from Chen Capital want to talk about expanding, she said. There's another property downtown, similar situation to Blackstone, distressed owner, untapped potential. They're asking if you're interested in replicating the model. I sat back, considering the weight of what she was offering. Another building meant more responsibility, more risk, more people depending on decisions I'd make. It meant accepting that the transformation that started in humiliation had become a calling. Tell them I'm interested, I said, but schedule the meeting for next week. I want Thomas to weigh in, and I want to make sure we're not overextending. Jennifer grinned. Cautious and ambitious. That's the combination that builds empires. I don't want an empire, I corrected. I want something sustainable, something that treats people well and lasts beyond me. Even better, she said, and left me to my writing.
That evening, as the sun set over the city and turned the glass facades into mirrors of fire, I rode the elevator to the 23rd floor for old time's sake. My father's office was empty now, being prepared for the new tenant, and I stood in the space where he'd once ruled his small kingdom. I thought about the coffee mug shattering against the wall, the contempt in his voice, the $20 bill thrown like an insult. I thought about rage transforming into purpose, humiliation crystallizing into clarity, and I thought about Thomas Blackstone's words, make sure you're chasing something, not running from something. What I discovered was that they were the same thing viewed from different angles. I'd run from humiliation into purpose, from invisibility into vision, from being the lowest of the low into understanding that hierarchies exist only because we agree to see them. The janitor's uniform still hung in my closet at home, cleaned and pressed, a reminder of where I'd started. Sometimes, late at night when tenants had long gone home, I'd put it on and walk the building's halls, emptying a trash bin here, straightening a crooked painting there, staying connected to the foundation that had taught me how structures work from the ground up. Frank found me like that one night, months after my father had left, and he just nodded knowingly. Once you've seen a building from the bottom, you never forget what holds it up, he said. The people, I replied. It's always the people. Now, standing in that empty office, as twilight faded to night, I pulled out my phone and called my father. He answered on the second ring. Thursday still works for therapy, I said, but I was thinking maybe we grab dinner after. There's this restaurant near the university where I teach my seminar. They make really good pancakes. Pancakes for dinner? He sounded amused. That's new. A friend once told me life's too short for arbitrary rules about when you can eat breakfast food, I said, thinking of a conversation with Thomas Blackstone months ago over one of our mentoring dinners. Besides, I want to tell you about a new building opportunity. Get your opinion, since you've been in this business longer than I've been alive. You want my opinion? The surprise in his voice was genuine. I want your experience, I corrected. You made mistakes, but you also built something for 30 years. That knowledge doesn't disappear because the business failed. I'm smart enough to learn from both what you did right and what you did wrong. Pancakes and property talk, my father said, and I could hear the smile. That sounds good, really good. Thursday at 7, there's a diner called Stella's on 5th. Meet you there. I'll be there, he said, and for the first time in years, I believed him. I hung up and took the elevator down, floor by floor, past offices where people had worked late and early, celebrated and mourned, built careers and ended them, past conference rooms where deals were made and broken, past break rooms where janitors gathered to share stories about tenants who'd never learned their names. In the lobby, Susan was locking up for the night, and I waved to her. "Building looks great," she called out. "You've done good work here, Marcus." "We've done good work," I corrected, and she laughed but nodded. I walked out into the spring evening, the city lights beginning to glow against the deepening blue sky. Blackstone Tower arose behind me, a monument to transformation, not mine, but collective. Every person who had invested time, labor, capital, or trust had contributed to its rebirth. The janitor bought the building, yes, but that was just the inciting incident. The real story was what came after, the daily choice to lead with empathy, to see clearly, to build something larger than pride or revenge. My phone buzzed with a text from Derek. New tenant signed. Conference room C is officially leased. Building hits 94% occupancy Monday. Pizza for a celebration? I texted back, "Make it pancakes. Everyone seems to like pancakes." And as I walked home through streets lined with buildings that held 1,000 stories like mine, I thought about the young business students who'd asked me to write the book, who saw in my story permission to start from wherever they were. I thought about the barista I'd left the $20 bill for, who might use that extra money to fund a dream he hadn't told anyone yet. Most of all, I thought about the truth I'd learned in 100 nights of invisible labor, that transformation happens in the spaces between contempt and compassion, between humiliation and humility, between being told you're nothing and proving to yourself you're something. The building was the vehicle, but the real property I'd acquired was harder to value and impossible to sell. It was the understanding that where you start matters far less than what you build from there. And in the end, that was worth more than $8 million, a corner office, or my father's belated approval. It was worth everything.